Hello, Rob McNeilly here, and thank you for joining in this conversation, which I've found to be so important uh, as a way of really adding to the effectiveness of our work and also uh, relieving a lot of our professional suffering, uh, burnout, overwhelm, and so on. So, just some words about me. People who don't know me, I was in a medical practice in Melbourne, Australia for 10 years, became interested in hypnosis, and I spent a little bit of time with the late Milton H. Erickson towards the end of his life. And what I learned from him changed my whole attitude to therapy and to hypnosis in particular, and it informs all of the clinical work that I've done and all of the teaching I've done in various parts of the globe. So in this talk, I want to say something about getting unstuck. Some clients come and they say, I've got this problem and I want your help, and we have a conversation and things start to move along and everybody's happy. That happens. Not always, but it does happen. When that happens, we think, oh, that's right. That's why I'm doing this work. That's why I like it so much. But not everybody is like that. Sometimes someone will come and they will tell us about their legitimate suffering, but they tell us about it in such a way that there's no kind of access to it. And typically we see this when in a marital situation where so we say, what's the problem? And one partner will say, oh, it's the other partner. If they would change, I'd be okay. And of course the other partner says, yeah, but if you would change, I'd be okay. So the dilemma there, if we don't recognise, is that we're looking for something where it isn't. Someone says, I'm fine, it's the other person. And particularly if the other person's not even in the room, well, that's an interesting challenge to say the least. We have to learn to do some work through ESP or something. So if we try and make a difference to someone who's not there, of course, we are going to get overwhelmed. Makes perfect sense. And also that some other people come completely reluctantly. How come you're here? Oh, someone said I should come. My spouse, my doctor, someone said I should come. It's like, oh, they're not really there for themselves. They're there because they've been sent to us. And very often when someone's been sent, if we don't recognise that, pretty soon we'll start to get frustrated. You know, can't you see that you need to do something here? And just to make light of it, to emphasise this, I like to say that with the people who come with a problem and things move, we fall in love with them. The people who come and we start to feel overwhelmed, we feel suicidal. And the people that come because they're sent and don't respond to our wisdom and our good advice, we get homicidal. So I'm kind of being a little foolish there, but if you get my point. So there are two beautiful flags, warning signs that we can notice in our response that can be so helpful. If we feel overwhelmed, it's very likely that what's happening is that we are picking up the mood of overwhelmedness from the client. They'll say, I've had this problem for a long time, and I've been to a lot of people and no one's helped me, and I don't know if there's any way of help. And if we listen to that, we start to think, and we catch their overwhelm. Hardly helpful for us. The client's overwhelmed, and we feel overwhelmed, they're paralysed, we'll get paralysed, everybody's stuck. So what we've found a very helpful preliminary step before we do anything to help someone move towards a solution is to give up all hope to begin with of finding a solution, to just down tools and validate. To say, you've had this problem for a long time. You've been to a lot of people that haven't helped you yet. It's caused a lot of suffering for you. It's been really terrible for you. I can't even begin to imagine just how bad things have been for you with this situation. Now, if you notice, saying something like that somehow goes against the common sense of our work of us wanting to help someone resolve a situation, move away from the problem and move towards a solution. But if we start to encourage someone to move towards a solution before there's been sufficient validation, we actually add to their problem and we can paralyse them. Until we validate their suffering as a first step, not as a final step, but as a first step, until we do that, everybody's stuck. And then we want to refer them to someone else and they become more and more despondent, nobody can help me, and then pretty soon everybody's in despair. So, before we do anything to help connect someone with their resources to move towards a solution, when we feel overwhelmed, let's stop, let's validate, let's acknowledge, let's be respectful of just how bad things have been. And I've noticed when I've done that some people have been so relieved to hear that someone at last is hearing just how bad it is. Their relief is palpable. And I've even seen people weep with relief. Just, oh, thank goodness someone gets just how bad it's been. So it's a great first step. And also, if someone has been sent and we start to feel frustrated, if you feel like, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's had that experience, typically with a teenager, why are you here? I don't know. Well, what could we talk about? I don't know. So how come you're here? Or someone said I should come here. Can't you be responsible? Can't you see you need to do, you really need to, blah. And if we do that, then we just become another haranguing voice in their head and just get them stuck, and they feel even more hopeless than when they first came in. So I remember a couple bringing their 15-year-old son to see me. And he'd been he'd been suspended from school because someone at school was teasing him. He was activated, he got into a fight, and then the school organisation came down on him because you're not allowed to fight on school grounds. Okay, so that's the problem. So the parents bring him, and he's sitting there looking around thinking, what am I doing here? And I said to him, it must be very boring for you to have to come and speak to someone like me. He looked at me. I said, I'm sure you've got a lot of other things that you'd much rather do, play football with your friends or something like that. He made eye contact. Then we started to talk. There was a connection because I'd acknowledged his reluctance. He didn't want to be there. When I acknowledged his reluctance to be there, we were on the same page. So he told me that he wanted to do well at school because he wanted to get good marks. He wanted to go to university so that then he would get a degree and make a lot of money. He had his whole future planned out very clearly, except this trouble was getting in the way. He was fighting and the school was stepping in. So having made that connection with him, so that we were on the same page, I was able to say to him, now, what can you do to get the school off your back? If you don't do something, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And your parents are going to be troubled. And they're going to keep dragging you back to me, or see someone even worse than me. And he had a slight smile on his face. So I said, what's the smallest thing that you could do that might make some small difference here? Something that you could do to get your parents off your back, to get your school off your case, so that then you can just get on and do what you want to do. You know, he was thoughtful. And then he said to me, oh, I know what I can do. He said, I'll tell that kid, when he teases me, he said, I'll tell him, I'll see you after school. His parents were horrified. They didn't want him fighting after school, but this 15-year-old was quite happy with the idea, because he could have the fight, but it'd be off school grounds, out of their jurisdiction. He wouldn't have a problem with school. So I encouraged the parents, and they somewhat reluctantly agreed to give it a go. So the next day he goes along to school, and sure enough, the kid teases him. And instead of fighting, he said, I'll see you after school. And of course, by the time after school had happened, the whole day had happened, and the whole thing had fizzled, and so there was no fighting. And I had intermittent contact with him over a number of years after that, and there was no problem. So he was able to do something, and he and I were able to make a connection only after I validated his reluctance. And so when someone is overwhelmed, if we validate that, legitimize that, if someone is reluctant to be with us, if we validate that and legitimize that, then there is a connection. And then things can start to move along. My friend Bill O'Hanlon says that we have one foot in validation and another foot in possibility. If we're saying, you know, what difference, how could you improve, we start to talk possibilities, and then someone balks and they say, oh no, I couldn't. Whoop, okay. Validate, 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 until the ground under their feet is solid. And then we can start to take a step with possibilities. Oh, maybe la 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 la. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, but I couldn't do that. Okay, stop. Validate, validate. So there is a balance there. Anytime there's a but, anytime there's a stuckness, anytime someone balks, anytime someone says, oh, I couldn't do that, validate. And my experience is that if we do this, not only my experience, but other people have told me that for their experience, that when we do this, not only do we get better results with our clients, because there is a connection, makes perfect sense. Not only that, but the therapists themselves relieves a lot of their own suffering. And it's actually very effective in preventing our burnout. If we are constantly hitting our head against a brick wall, we'll get a headache. But if we can acknowledge someone else's suffering, if we can acknowledge someone else's reluctance, we are with them, they are with us, then we're on the same team, then there's some possibility of things moving along. And when things improve, we feel the satisfaction of that. We don't get burnt out. So there's a lot more that we could say about this, but my wish is that exploring what we're doing will give you some additional options, some additional ways of joining someone, additional ways of engaging someone so then things can start to move on. So, thank you for watching this. Thank you for being part of this. And I'd love to hear any comments that you have. I'd love to hear about any results that you get, any questions that you have. That would be a pleasure. So, thanks for watching.